Hello, Astrobro subscribers. I apologize for the long wait between this video and the last. I guess just to start off with, I was working on a video series that I thought I was ready to produce and film, but it turns out I still have to get my thoughts straight on it. It's an original method of interpreting charts that I'm fairly certain that me and one of the people that I study with actually created this method of interpretation. I haven't seen it anywhere else. Obviously, it's not completely original. There are parts of it that go back into history quite far, but as far as the specifics of it, I don't think I've seen anybody else use this particular method before. So that's going to be coming soon. I realize I have to learn to talk about it a little bit more effectively before I can share it with you guys. This being said, because it was getting to be quite a long time since I shot my last video, I decided to do another series. That's something I haven't talked about yet. I've implied it in a few of the videos. I've sort of alluded to it, but it's the concept of retrogrades. And I guess I'm going to take this time to go into a little bit about just the general principles that you're gonna use when you're looking at retrogrades and how they influence a person's life. So the first thing you're gonna look at, or the first thing that I guess it's important to know when you're looking at retrogrades, is to know which planets are gonna go retrograde, how long they're gonna go retrograde for, and which planets just don't go retrograde. And then once you understand that, you can start looking at how long or how common these cycles are. So you can start understanding when to blame something on a retrograde and when not to, when it's appropriate to do that and when it's not appropriate to do that. So, you know, one thing that's kind of a trope that people who don't really like astrology will use to dismiss people who like astrology and who apply it in their life is people abusing Mercury retrograde and just like blaming it for all their problems, even when it's not necessarily even Mercury retrograde. So I want to clear that up. I made a video a while ago, one of the first videos on this channel, called how to troubleshoot with astrology, where I basically said, first you want to look at, is this thing that's happening in your life that you're trying to diagnose with astrology, is it related to your own behavior? Are you actively screwing yourself in some way? Because if so, don't blame that on the planets, because you do still have a choice and a free will that is just contained by the planets and your biology, among other things. So, and then I also said, when you have eliminated that you're not doing anything too stupid when you're trying to diagnose something using astrology, so you're not blaming your own misbehavior on astrology. There is another principle, which is just looking at things in terms of layers and time frames. So when did this thing start? Is it an hourly phenomenon? Did it last for an hour? Did it last for a day? Did it last for a year? Did it last for 2.5 years? And based on the length of the time cycle, you can actually use the time cycle to diagnose which pattern, to specify and bring out the pattern of the astrological pattern that could be causing this thing, and then you'll know how long it's going to last. And if you want to try to remedy it, then you can do that using the information associated with that planet and its cycles. So, this being said, the sun and moon do not go retrograde, so if anybody ever blames something on like sun retrograde or moon retrograde, know that they're full of crap, and that's not a thing that happens. The planet that goes retrograde most frequently is Mercury. It goes retrograde every 88 days, and the retrograde lasts for 22 days. So that's a 1:4 ratio. And so basically, what that means is that if you're going to realistically blame something on Mercury retrograde, then that's going to only be able to be done 1/4 of the time. The other time, then it's probably you, or it's something you did in the past affecting you. Um, Venus goes retrograde every year and a half, and that lasts for about 2.5 months. Mars goes retrograde every 2 years, and that lasts for approximately 2 months. Jupiter goes retrograde every year, as does Saturn, and I believe the Jupiter retrograde lasts for about 3 months, and Saturn retrograde lasts for about, I think it's almost half a year. I think it's like 4 or 5 months. So those planets spend a fair bit more time in retrograde than the other planets, even if they have a longer break where they're direct. And then Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto are retrograde almost half the year. They're just a little less than half the year, I believe. So they're retrograde almost half the time, and the effects are less noticeable because you spend half the time in retrograde and half the time out of retrograde. So there's not very much differential between the experience of it being retrograde, although you can still feel it if you're looking for it. It's just not going to cause a terrible amount of disruption in your life, because those things have such long cycles anyway that it's very difficult to find the causal link to something in your life. Usually, unless you have a lot of placements that are extremely dependent on those cycles, those planet cycles, you're not going to be dealing with the effects of them on that fine grain level. All right. So this being said, I guess I can go into the different planets and what their retrogrades are going to mean in terms of your life. So Mercury retrograde is generally just a mild annoyance, and it's going to be more annoying depending on how many Mercury placements you have in your chart. So that's 3rd house, 6th house, Gemini, and Virgo. So however many of those planets you have in those signs or houses, that's going to amplify the extent to which Mercury retrograde bothers you. Expect internet delays, expect miscommunication, expect things to not arrive on time, packages to not ship on time, packages to not, things you buy on the internet or by mail to not arrive on time. If you are very afflicted with Mercury, you could get pickpocketed or robbed during this time. Not robbed, but like stolen from during this time. Yeah, so but mostly it's just miscommunication. If the only reason this could really be a problem is if you have Mercury in a house that's related to relationships or career or is related to Mars placements, in which case you should be more careful to not deal with, not try to get into verbal arguments, because this could trigger other planets, more malefic planets, that will damage you. But generally speaking, this thing is just annoying, and it just is, your YouTube videos load slower for whatever reason. Or also, since Mercury rules short distance communication, you don't want to have to be in a position where you depend on Ubers or like taxi cabs or that kind of thing during Mercury retrograde. Sometimes it'll work out, but I have experienced that it is more likely to mess up your schedule if you have to depend on some kind of like public transportation during this time. So all that being said, that is Mercury retrograde. It's normally not too bad, again, unless you have a bunch of Mercury placements, or unless you have unless your Mercury placements are connected to more malefic planets, or unless Mercury is retrograde alongside a very malefic planet like Saturn or Mars. So that being said, let's get into Venus retrograde. Venus retrograde, like I said, it happens once every year and a half for about 2 months, and this is a time where if you have Venus conjunct malefic planets, it's going to upset your life a fair bit more in terms of your stability and security. But basically, the main point of Venus retrograde is to get you to question and stress test your commitments to both relationships and to jobs, because again, Venus rules the interview process. So depending on where Venus is in your chart and how much Venus stuff you've got going on in your chart, this could be a time of great uncertainty. If you have it related to Saturn, or if you have it related to Mars, or usually just Saturn and Mars, what tends to happen is your relationships get stress tested, especially when you're young, and you're going to be well aware of the red flags of your job, employer, and partners during this time. And sometimes the appropriate changes will have to be made to those circumstances, because basically the glaring errors are going to become very apparent during this time. And that's about all there is to that. Mars retrograde happens every 2 years, like I said, happens for a couple months. It's normally not terrible, again, unless you have a lot of Mars placements, specifically in the 6th or 8th house, or 10th house, or maybe 12th house, the later malefic houses. You can have a hard time with people feeling like they're invincible, people trying to attack you or assault you. If you don't have a lot of Mars placements, or Mars placements in malefic houses, this probably isn't going to be the worst thing in the world. All that happens is, that one annoying guy at your work might be more annoying than usual, or get extra cocky. But basically what this does is it empowers people who really ought not to be attacking people or to be sort of annoying to people. It encourages them and it makes them feel strong, and it encourages people to make snap judgments and do stupid things. So, just be aware of that during this time. Usually it's not that bad unless you're a person who has to deal with a lot of Mars energy in your life. Jupiter retrograde is a time period where it's pretty benefic. What you're going to want to do is give things to beggars during this time period. Like anybody who is sort of down in the dumps, if they're begging on the side of the road, especially if they're a street musician or street performer, it is generally considered very beneficial to your life to give $1 if you have it to these people, or give some money if you have it to these people during this time. It's a time where generosity is rewarded. And if you are dealing with problems with your family, specifically your father, this can be a time where those things come up. But generally speaking, this is a time where you can get extra good karma, I suppose would be the easiest way to talk about it, from helping people in a selfless way, especially if they ask. So if there's a beggar who comes up to you and asks you for like some small amount of money or food and you have it, it would be in your best interest to give it to him during this time period. But all that being said, Jupiter is a pretty good planet to be retrograde. It doesn't affect you too much. It might have you questioning your like grand vision or something like that, but usually that happens when you have other planets related to Jupiter, or a lot of Jupiter in your chart, like I've said for the other planets. And finally, this is probably the most important one, Saturn retrograde. What Saturn retrograde does is it stress tests your ability to deal with provocation. So anytime there's Saturn retrograde, which again happens for about 4 months out of the year, this is a time where people are going to try to provoke you, and they're going to be verbally or physically even in your face. And the best way to handle this is to just sort of become Gandhi for 3 or 4 months. Like, just become very peaceful, just turn the other cheek, look the other way, ignore them. Generally speaking, they're not going to attack you. They're just going to try to get you to break the rules of society, because that's what Saturn represents. So it's very important to not respond to provocation during a Saturn retrograde, because they're going to get what they deserve regardless, but you don't have to be a part of that. So if you can just ignore that antagonism that's going to happen during this time, and be aware of that cycle that's happening, especially if it happens during a Mercury or Mars retrograde, provocation is going to be at an all-time high, and the more you can ignore it, the better, because it's basically testing your ability to follow the rules under extreme stress. So that was my video on retrogrades, and I am going to be trying to make that original content more available. I just have to organize my thoughts on it a little more, and I guess I will see you guys then, and I hope you are finding usefulness in the information that I'm trying to provide in this channel. Astrology's helped my life a lot, and I hope it can help your life too. Till next time.